All right, so this lesson is on independent and dependent variables. Now, you should be mostly familiar with these. I mean, you get a heavy dose of this through science class, where you're always testing and looking for what impact one variable has on another. So you should be very familiar with this one, but we're also going to look at this today through a math lens, okay? Because it also plays out in math class. Because a lot of times, two things do go together, like how many hours you work and how much pay you get, or how much effort you put in and what happens as a result of that effort. Okay, so let's just talk about this from a math lens. Let's first define our terms here. The independent variable is the fixed one or the constant. Okay, it's fixed or it's constant. We'll discuss that a little bit later. It can be represented by x coordinates and is sometimes called the control. So if you're ever doing an experiment, which a lot of times we do these, sometimes just in classes, sometimes on our own, we just do lots of little experiments here and there to see what effect something has. You're kind of playing with what we call the IV, the independent variable there. All right, you're controlling something and you're seeing what effect that has. Now, examples of IV, examples of this one, lots of times it's time. Okay, how many days, how many hours, how many seconds, how many weeks, how many years, how much things are changing over time. So time is very often your IV. That's the most common example. There's also the DV, okay? The dependent variable is the responsive one. It's dependent on the independent variable, all right? This is why it gets its name, dependent variable, is because it depends on the IV, all right? It can be represented with y coordinates and always changes, all right? So it is responding to this one, or it is dependent upon the IV, all right? So there's just some terminology for us to begin with. Let's look at some scenarios here and just talk through the IV and the DV so we understand which one's which. Number one, Jameson runs M miles and burns C number of calories. So we don't know how many miles, we don't know the number of calories, we're going to use variables. So what's the independent variable here is how much she runs, okay, the distance that she decides to run. So we would just simply say number of miles, and they gave us a variable, so we're going to use that variable in our answer, M. Now, this is our control, all right, this is our IV, and that is going to determine how many calories she burns. That means this, the DV, is number of calories, C. So just to think about this one, how much she runs determines how many calories she will burn. You can turn that around and say the number of calories she burns depends on how much she runs. I mean, if she just runs down the hallway, that's not a lot of calories. But if she runs a mile or 2 miles or some longer distance, that's going to change this one. So this is responding to that. This is changing in accordance with that. But that would be our IV and that would be our DV. And number two, the more hours that Brady practices, the better his test grade will be. So think about what he can control. What he can control here is how much he practices, okay? So hours, that is the IV. What depends upon the hours is, his test grade. The more he does this, the better this will be, all right? If he doesn't practice much, then his grade will probably be not very good. If he practices a lot, then his grade will probably be much better, all right? So the IV and the DV. In number three, Michael pays about $9 per month for his Netflix subscription. So what he is in control of is how many months he subscribes to Netflix, okay? That is the IV. What depends upon that is this right here. I mean, if he's paying that much per month, well, then that would mean for 1 month, he's paying about $9, for 2 months, $18, for 3 months, $27, and so on. So the cost is dependent upon the length of his subscription, all right? Remember how we talked about how time is very often your IV? Well, that shows itself here in number two. Hours is a measure of time. It also shows itself here in number 3. Months is a measure of time, okay? Number 4, a car travels 60 miles per hour. Now, this is a very short sentence. You might not even really see your two variables, but if you break down this right here, miles per hour, a car travels 60 miles per hour. Now we have some information that we can work with, and our IV would be the number of hours we're driving 60 miles, okay? So again, a measure of time, okay? We're assuming here that we're gonna go 60 miles per hour continuously for a certain number of hours. And that means that if we're driving this much time, well then the dependent variable is how many miles we'll travel. And we can make a little table of this if we want. You know, we would say 1 hour is 60 miles, 2 hours would be 120 miles, 3 hours would be 180 miles, and so on. So the miles traveled depends on how many hours we drive. Okay, so let's just keep going here. Try these two on your own, pause the screen, and come back when you are. All right, number 5, each bag of popcorn costs $6 at the game. Well, the independent variable is the number of bags of popcorn. I mean, if you buy 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, that's going to impact the price. So that's your IV. And the DV then is how much you're going to pay, total cost. Okay, like I just said, if you buy 1, it's $6. If you buy 2, it's 12. If you buy 3, it's 18, and so on. So the price is changing depending upon how much you've bought. In number 6, the later Jessie stays up at night, the sleepier she is at school. Well, the IV would be how much sleep she gets, the number of hours of sleep. And that is going to determine her level of sleepiness or her energy level. Okay, think of it in whatever way, but her sleepiness depends upon how much she sleeps the night before. If she sleeps a good night's sleep, then her sleepiness is not going to be much at all. But if she doesn't get much sleep, then this level of sleepiness will be pretty high the next day when she's at school. Now, tables and graphs can also display IV and DV, okay, independent and dependent quantities. Here's an example of a graph right here. Paul's weight loss, you can see here the number of weeks. And on the y-axis, you see total pounds lost. So it looks like over time, he is losing more and more pounds, which is probably what his goal was. Maybe he was training for something. Maybe he just went on a diet. Maybe he was trying to meet some goals, whatever. But let's talk about the independent variable. Well, usually the independent variable is the one on the y-axis, I'm sorry, on the x-axis, all right? So that's this one. So our IV is how many weeks he has been trying to lose weight. Again, this is a measure of time. As we said earlier, time is often your IV because things change over time. All right, that's the premise. Things change over time, and cost can change, weight can change, value can change. So things change over time. Now, if that is the IV, then that means this axis is your DV, total pounds lost. That depends on how much time has passed. Okay. List the independent quantities. Well, that would just be how we've chosen to number our x-axis. So in this case, we've numbered by ones. So we're just going to list those off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The dependent quantities, those would be this other axis. Okay, well, now we're counting by threes on that one, so we're going to number by threes. And we started at 3, and we went up all the way to 30. Now do keep in mind, we have numbered differently on each axis. Here we counted by ones, here we counted by threes. And that is okay as long as we're consistent on that axis, okay? So like if we're counting by threes on the y-axis, that's good and that's fine as long as we continuously count by threes. If at some point we were to go from 3 to 6 to 9 to 11, now we're off. Now that's bad because we're not counting by threes anymore. So it is okay to count by different increments as long as you're consistent on that axis. If you need more time on this screen, make sure you pause it now because I'm going to go to the next slide now. Now we can also look at this in tables, okay? So if we look at a table, lots of times they give us a column here and a column here. Well, if we're looking here at number of pounds and total weight, well, these two variables, one of these is affected by the other, and one of these is impacting the other. So, for instance, total weight, that's being impacted by how many pounds somebody is gaining. Now, maybe they're training for something. Maybe they're trying to muscle up for a competition or for a season of life, who knows? But the IV here is number of pounds, and the DV would be the total weight, because that depends on how much pounds or how many pounds they've gained. All right. So our IV is number of pounds, and our DV is total weight. In this next one here, think of this as driving. You know, in this many hours, we've traveled this many miles. In this many hours, we've traveled that many miles, and so on. So our IV would be number of hours, and our DV would be number of miles. Okay. And this other one right here, independent, would be the number of months that have passed, and the DV would be the total cost, how much we're paying in 1 month or over 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. This depends on that one. Again, think of this as a measure of time. Think of this as a measure of time, okay? Like we said, time is very often your IV. Sometimes it's not, but it might be something related to time. Like maybe this person is losing this many pounds each week. Who knows? I mean, it could still be related to time in a sense. I want you to try these two on your own, actually these three on your own right now. So pause the screen and come back when you're ready. All right, so number 8, you should have come up with minutes for your IV and total words for your DV. Number 9, you should have hopefully come up with hours for your IV. Again, that's a measure of time, just like minutes was. And inches of rain for your DV. And in number 10, you should have come up with weeks for your IV. Again, a measure of time. And total costs for your DV, all right? Now, if you haven't caught on here, in tables, where do you notice the IV is usually? It's usually on the left, okay? It's the left column. Hours was the left column. Minutes was the left column. Typically, you put your IV in the first column, all right? That's a little hint for where to see it if it's a table. That means your DV would be the right column. Cost, inches of rain, total words, whatever. All right, summarizing today's lesson, there's a couple bullet points. The first one is this right here. The IV is the variable that is changing. It's the one that is changing. Weeks, hours, minutes, things like that. For instance, if you were wanting to make some money babysitting or mowing lawns, it would be how many hours you've babysat, or it would be how many lawns you've mowed. That is going to determine the DV, okay? This is the variable that is affected by the change. The variable that is affected by the change. Again, if you were babysitting, hours would be your IV, and you know how much money you make would be your DV, all right? Same thing for mowing lawns. How many lawns you mow would be your IV, and how much money you make would be your DV, because it depends on your IV, all right? All right, that brings this lesson to a close. Have a good day.